Okay, so I'll just start, right? All right, since we didn't really stop, we just kind of like paused. Okay, so I'll not go through the data in Italian from Giorgio Longobardi, but what it does is it essentially shows the same effect that I just showed for the Gallic cases, but with verbal normalizations. So it looks like we find the same thing in other languages, and as I said, I've tested it in a lot of head initial languages which allow PPs to commute, and I haven't found any language that doesn't do this yet, so that's kind of interesting. So it turns out then that, do you remember we essentially had two kinds of explanation for dealing with PP peripherality, right? One, because we got rid of the other ones, right? We first of all showed that the PPs were peripheral in surface structure. Then we're asking whether you get that surface structure by movement or not, effectively. And what I've shown you is that the only reasonable way of doing it by movement is the Keynesian system, because it's the only one that's theoretically motivated in terms of case movement, and you know, gets the right basic constituent order. But I've shown you it doesn't provide, it does well with constituency, but it doesn't do well with hierarchy, in effect. Right? So we think about syntax as being fundamentally about two things. One is getting the right constituent sizes, and the other one is making sure you hierarchically organize those constituents correctly. So what Kane's system does, and my system do, for PP peripherality is to get the right constituency both, but Kane's system doesn't provide you a story for the right hierarchy of those constituents. Okay? So it turns out, I think, that this works out as a strong argument against the roll-up analysis of PP peripherality. And as I said at the start, that's pretty good because my system can't allow roll-up anyway. Okay? And if you think about that from an acquisition perspective, you know, sometimes people in this room do, then that's also kind of nice because it means that, you know, if this is a system that kids have in their heads, no roll-up, right? Then they don't need to learn the binding effects. All they need to do is they need to learn that this is a language in which you can commute PPs. You do that immediately, you get a hierarchy effect, okay? And then the binding falls out of that. Okay? If you're allowing roll-up in your acquisition system, okay, then what the kids have to learn is not only they have to figure out the right roll-up analysis of this, and I've shown you there's been a couple, but also they have to figure out how the right reconstruction works in order to get the binding effects, and that is a pretty difficult thing to do since the reconstruction looks like it's entirely stipulated. So, and I'm pretty sure the kids don't get enough evidence from these PPs inside noun phrases with binding effects in them, right? And it's a pretty rare phenomenon, so I'm pretty sure that they can't learn that in any kind of learning situation. Okay, so basically, what my system does is it gives you an explanation for this binding stuff, and of course it gives you an explanation for PP peripherality in general. I just want to run through that very briefly, because I just want to make sure that you see how that works. So the basic structure, okay, I don't know why I put F there rather than cos, but anyway, is in 110 on page 16. Right? So the basic structure of a noun phrase, pretend those F's are cofs, right? The basic structure of a noun phrase then is that we've got some cof type structure. It has, this is a noun phrase with a prepositional phrase argument in it. It has a PP lower down, then the noun phrase is in some higher constituent, and you can scramble, and then you raise that DP higher, and then you can scramble the PP. Okay? We get that, this is for n initial languages, right? Which means that in order to get the n to be initial, we need to raise that little DP up into a high position. That will put the noun initial for us. Is there any way of generating an NPP-AP order from this? Well, in order to do that, what we have to do is what you see in 113, right? What you'd have to do is you have to say that the NP moves out of the little constituent that's in some higher position, leaving the AP on its own, and then we'd have to scramble the PP, obligatorily cast it, to get that order. Right? But, remember in my system, so what does that mean to move the NP out? So let's have a quick look at that. So basically what we have is we'd have some constituent. Inside that constituent we have the noun phrase. This is an NA order. So let's say that the root noun is picture. It projects up to an N. Then above that we have some functional structure which gives you an AP, like Jinkby has. And we have lots of them. Okay. And then above that we have some other kind of structure. And this is where the noun is pronounced. Right? So we get picture, big. Yeah, picture, big. Yeah? Remember, this is the way I do head moves. This whole thing here is pronounced as picture. Alright, so in order to strand the AP, remember what we'd have to do is we'd have to take this KP here, which is pronounced as of. Okay. We'd have to move that into some higher position, say the scrambling position we've been talking about. Then we'd have to take just this picture and move it out to here, stranding the AP. That's the only way that we can get this ungrammatical order, right? But notice what this does is it takes, it slices off a bit of the extent of projection picture. Right? But remember, my system doesn't allow you to do that. Well, it does allow you to do that, but what it doesn't allow you to do is it doesn't allow you to do that and then, go through the same functional projection. Right? So this is the extended projection of N. Right? So what we're not allowed to do is take picture or some larger chunk of here and move it to be a specifier of the extended projection of N, because that would violate filth, right? Because you'd end up getting something which is looking like this, right? Where this is also F. This is F all the way, right? This is the single extended projection. We're taking the chunk of it, moving it to here. Then we have this is in the same extended projection as this, and this is in the same extended projection as this, and that violates filth, right? So if we have to stop off at the edge of a specifier to get out of that specifier, right? We can't do that because then that would create this structure here, right? So if we say that in order to get out of the specifier, you have to stop at the edge of the specifier, that is specifiers are phases effectively in this system, then you rule out you ever be able to generate this structure as a base structure. Yeah.
So if a language has a scrambling like this, is it possible for children to run the
Is it possible? I mean, so are you asking where this comes from? Where this scrambling projection comes from?
I know. So children need to run UEP in their language, right?
They don't need to learn the UEP.
Yeah.
Right? The UEPs are given by UG.
Okay.
Right? U stands for universal. Universal extended projection is given by UEP.
Okay.
What they need to do is they need to learn which particular instantiation of the universal extended projection they find in their language. Right?
Yeah.
So we would assume that, in these UDPs above here somewhere is this scrambling thing.
And this order is universal for every language? Oh, okay, so children doesn't have to run.
No, they have to learn whether it's present or not.
Okay.
Right? I don't know of any N initial languages, at least, where you can't commute PP arguments inside the noun phrase.
No, okay.
They all seem to be able to do that. I don't know about N final languages. I don't think they do allow that. But anyway, so there's something about this scrambling position which seems to be universally available, right? And I think sometimes you wouldn't have it in some languages.
But from the word order, children can run this language have scrambling?
Yeah, I mean, the moment they hear, a picture by Mary of John, that's enough. They're like, because they know that the base order should be picture of John by Mary, because that's what the UEP says. The moment they hear it's the other way around, they must posit this projection, which immediately means that they get this set of binding effects following.
But in English, so inside the NP there is a scrambling for Sean, but in the sentence level there should be no scrambling.
I shouldn't have called it scrambling. Let's call it extract. Right, for extra position. It's the, whatever that is. It's the thing that you move, it's the place that you move PPs to when you do what we normally call extra position.
And any PP can move this portion?
Well, yeah, as long as it's in a specifier position, you can always move there. Yeah. So back to this point here. This is an attempt to generate the impossible NPP AP order. The only way to do it is to essentially extract this N from inside this constituent here and move this PP across it. The point I'm saying is that in order to extract the N, right, what you need to do is you need to move through the edge of the specifier, because the specifier is the face, but you can't move through the edge of the specifier you can't move the N through the edge of the specifier, because the N is part of the extended projection of that whole phrase, right? So basically, if you say that you always need to move through the spec of a spec to get out of the spec, right? You can never roll up through the edge of the spec, basically. So if that's true, and that seems perfectly reasonable, right? I mean, it seems reasonable that in order to move out of the spec, you have to move through the spec to the edge, right? Then we rule out this order universally. So we get PP peripherality from three things. One is the syntax of relational nominals in general. One is the constraint against roll-up movement in general, which not only rules out a Kane analysis, it also rules out this kind of analysis. Okay? And then we need to say that specifiers in general are phases, right? They need to move through the edge of the spec to get out of the spec. In fact, in my system, basically, you can only move specs. The final outcome is anything that's a spec, you can move, but you can't move from inside. You can't move bits of extended projections. Okay. So that's the derivation of this half of the PP peripherality condition. What about the other half? So the other half is a little bit more complex, and I don't really have so much to say about it. And that's the one that's probably more interesting to you because that's the end final case. All right. So I think that PP peripherality seems to be true for end final languages. I now feel I've never given this to an audience of Korean. You can tell me if it's true or not. So I've tested it in a bunch of them, and I've given you some examples there. So so here's Bangla. So you get tree big picture like. So you get the argument tree, right, which has got this postposition-y, genitive-y thing after it in Bangla. So you get of the tree type thing, big picture like, and not big of the tree picture like. So that's Bangla. Then I've given you Malayalam, exactly the same structure. Okay, and then I've given you Turkish. And in the book, I've given you an example from Japanese as well, right? So here's my question to you. What happens in Korean? How do you say, I like the big picture of the tree? Or I'm sitting at the short edge of the table. Let's try that one first. Short edge of the table. How do you say that? In Korean.
그 책상에 날카로운 가장자리. 그 책상에 PP, AP, N.
So it's the same as the Bangla case. And the short edge of the table is something like table of short edge. Yeah? Okay, cool. Well done, Korean. You're following UG. Okay, so we can maybe talk a little bit later on about the structures of, I mean, I'm sure it's way more complex than just that, but at least, you know, it looks like broadly head final languages are also doing the right thing. That is, we don't have, I mean, there's a question about how to derive of the table long edge, right, in any of these languages, but we don't have a constituent which is edge of the table, right? We don't see that in surface structure, right? We don't see of the table edge, right, to the exclusion of the adjective. That's the point. So I think that's, I mean, I think this PP peripherality generalization seems pretty strong, probably. Okay, there are some counterexamples. So Japanese has some counterexamples, maybe Korean does as well, where you have some adjectives that can occur before the PP, but I'm pretty sure that all of those adjectives are really reduced relatives. So they're much, much higher up in the structure. Okay. All right, what I want to do in the next chunk is talk to you about basically how possession works in the noun phrase. And I'm going to do this through Gallic, which has got a particularly complicated noun phrase. Is something happening to my... Was that? Keep working. Okay. Keep working. Okay. So what happened?
Noise.
Oh, was there some noise? Maybe just because I'm shouting. It's better. Okay. All right. So what I want to do now is take you to the last bit of the book, right? I put this as the last lecture because it's not so crucial as the rest of it. So if you want to go to sleep now, you've basically got most of the real things that I want to say in the book, right? This last bit is a little extra bit about the nature of possession and how that works in my system. And I think it's kind of cute, and I have no idea how possession works actually in head final languages, so it might be interesting to find out. All right, so we know most of pages 1 and 2 and 3 in the handout there. But let's just have a quick finish. Let's just have a quick look at 17, 18, and 19, just to remind ourselves. So 17 is where we've got to already. So we've got a big picture at Mary, okay? Right. And we've seen just 2 minutes ago that we can also have of and at, and that's what you get in 19. So big picture of Mary, and that's in the specifier of this Kof representation, and then that whole thing is in the specifier of the Kof possessor. Okay. So that's the basic structure we're going to start with, which is what I just motivated here. Okay. But I also told you there's another way of doing possession in Gaelic with genitives. And I haven't told you how that really works. All I did was I kind of drew a vague tree, but actually we should know how that thing works really. So genitives look as follows. So in 20, you can say picture big Hamish, right? Hamish is the genitive of Seamus. Okay? Do people know this Scottish name Hamish? You guys ever heard of it? Okay. So I mean. There was a TV program called Hamish Macbeth, which was about a detective in the Isles of Scotland. And Hamish is a very common Scottish name for men, just in normal Scottish, you know, all over Scotland. But actually, Hamish is just this name Seamus in the vocative, right? And the vocative is syncretic with the genitive in Gaelic. And what you do to make this into, so I'll draw this, write this in IPA. You know so much I love IPA. So this is Seamus, right? So what happens in Gaelic to form the genitive is you palatalize the final consonant and you lenite the initial one. So palatalize and soften. Okay? So the soft version of sh is h, and then I get a, m, and the palatalized version of si is of course sh. So from Seamus, the genitive and the vocative become Hamish. So in English that's normally spelled Hamish. Actually I have no idea how you spell English. I keep on spelling that. can't remember. Yeah, like that. Sorry, my Gaelic spelling is really interfering with my English spelling, and they're quite different, right? So this name Hamish, which is used in Scottish English, is actually the vocative of Seamus. And so you'll see when I pronounce this, the vocative is syncretic with the genitive, so we'll see lots of Hamish. And I use this name because it's a really good name for finding the genitive out. Because lots of names don't start with something you can't soften and end with something you can't palatalize like a vowel, right? So this is a very good name. Okay, that was nothing to do with the talk. That was just a little bit of learning about Gaelic phonology and how it affects English naming convention. Okay, so 20, we get picture big Hamish, right? Seamus's big picture, and that genitive has to occur outside of the adjective, right? So that looks a little bit like what we're used to already, right? You can't get picture Seamus big, as you see in 21. Okay, so we're going to ask the question of what's the syntax of this genitive and how does it relate to the syntax of the act possessive. Okay. So here's the basic descriptive generalizations that go along with this genitive case. This is that interesting for you, but it might be. I'll run through it reasonably quickly. So part, right, in Gaelic, part and property semantics. So, things like size or weight or color, these kinds of, basic inherent properties of nouns, these always occur with the genitive, and they're very, very strange with the prepositional, right? So that's what you see in 23. So, mir te gewurst, you can see that, so that noun for table is actually borscht, right, or board in some dialects. So we lenite the first part of it, b becomes v, and then we palatalize the rest of it. So ord becomes erscht, and we get verscht. Okay? So just so you know. So mir te gewurst means size of the table, and we don't say the size of the table in Gaelic. It's really weird to say that. Okay? Body parts, you also get that. So kriya Hamish, Seamus's heart, but unkriya ek Seamus, the heart at Seamus, is really weird. That sounds like he's an Aztec sacrificial priest, and he's going dragging the heart out of the victim and say, "Oh look, there's the heart at Seamus," right? So it's like inalienable. Right? That's true for unique body parts. For body parts where you've got more than one of them, then you can use the act phrase. So Korak Hamish means Seamus's finger, but you can say Chorak ek Seamus, the finger at Seamus. So it's not quite inalienable, it's also got uniqueness as well. Kinship terms, in general, they want the genitive. So Brahid Hamish, Seamus's brother. Brahid ek Seamus is a bit weird. Right? Strangely enough, they're a bit better in the plural. No idea why. Now Brahid and ek Seamus is better if you use the act phrase. Now, however, if you use these representation nouns that we're talking about, like picture and statue and stuff like that, they actually prefer the of. They prefer the people, right? So those are the examples we've seen before, right? Picture of James with the of, and you can say Jalaban Hamish, right? But and it can mean Seamus's picture, right? Picture of Seamus. But actually, most speakers prefer to use picture of Seamus as a preference there. Okay, so unlike PP possessors, so this is just so you can sort of see what's going on so far with the different semantic classes of what likes to be genitive and what likes to be prepositional. I don't know what happens in other languages. So unlike PP possessors, genitive possessors are sort of stuck. So they don't commute. They don't scramble. Right? So you can say the picture big of Mary at Seamus, or at Mary of Seamus, but if you use the genitive better come first. So that's what you've got in 28. Jalav more Hamish, Jivadi. Okay, not the other way around. I'm going to skip. Can I skip this? No, I shouldn't actually. Alright, you can have, you can't have a prepositional possessor and a genitive at the same time. Now that might just be for semantic reasons, it's hard to tell, but it's certainly the case. So you can't say Mary's brother at Seamus, right? You can't use both a genitive and an all phrase. That might be a semantic effect, but it's worth noting. Okay? Now here's the most interesting thing, or it's the most interesting thing. Here's an interesting thing about these possessors, which is, you notice I say things like cat, Seamus, sorry, Hamish. So we get cat of James, and we can't have uncat Hamish. That's terrible. So it turns out that these possessors are in complementary distribution with a definite article. Now that's the same as English, but you know, in English the possessor and the definite article look like they're in the same place, right? In English it looks, you know, it's got the man, the cat, James's cat. But in Gaelic they're in complementary distribution, even though the definite article and the possessor are on different sides. Okay. So, so that's the next one. The final point is that with the prepositional possessors, you actually need to have the definite article. So that's a little bit like the demonstratives we saw earlier on, right? With demonstratives, you need the definite article, and with the prepositional possessor, you need the definite article. So you can't say cat, ek, Davy. Davy is David. Okay. So this is you can't. This is not how you say David's cat. It's bad. But if you put uncat, that's okay. So this and this kind of work the opposite way. All right. So actually, what this gives us is a bunch of generalizations that I'm going to now give you a very neat syntactic story for that follows out of the system that we've got. Okay. So the generalizations are in 33. They go, genitives are in complementary distribution to the articles. Genitives obligatorily precede complement PPs, unlike PP possessors. Genitive obligatorily precede adjectives, just like PP possessors. Genitives are in complementary distribution with possessors, PPs. And here's something I haven't said to you yet, but you can kind of see it's true from the examples we went through in 23 to 26. Genitives broadly are a superset of all the possible relations that are normally expressible by PPs in other languages. Right? So, in Gaelic, you know, all the things you say, the size of the boat, or the chapter of the book, or the, you know, in French, the heart of Seamus, or, well, not Seamus, the heart of Jean, right? And so on, right? These kind of things that we've been talking about, you know, as kinds of codes, right? Part, properties, all that kind of stuff. These are all different kinds of things you find with different prepositions in different languages. In Gaelic and actually in English, it turns out that the genitive is the superset of all of those semantic relations, right? That is, it captures them all somehow. Yeah? I think that's true in all languages that I know of. The genitive, in general, allows you to have not just the possessive relation, but all of the relations that you find elsewhere. Okay. Now, some languages don't like you to have a genitive, so Romance languages notoriously don't have a genitive, they only have the prepositional phrase, right? Some languages have a genitive, like English, so in English it's also true that if you say John's book, John's size, John's cake, John's finger, John's eye, John's mother, etc., the genitive is a superset of all the semantic relationships that are expressible by the prepositional phrases. Okay? I think that's universally true with true genitives. So what we have then is a generalization that goes, that I'll call P-gen, right? That is, it's sort of an alternation between expressing the possessor with prepositionally and expressing the possessor with a genitive. With a preposition, you get an article. Okay, it occurs at the very end and follows the adjective. With the genitive, you don't get an article. It follows all the other prepositional phrases and it follows the adjective. Okay, and moreover, it's a superset of all the other keys. Yeah.
Very minor point. 33C.
Mm-hmm.
It should be follow instead of
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yes. Good point. I didn't notice I made that. Yeah. Okay, so what's the analysis of this? Well, you've seen most of the data already, which motivates this analysis. So you've seen the data with the binding, you've seen the data with the quantifier. So I'll just give you the analysis, since actually we don't really need to motivate it much more. So the analysis is going to look as follows. Like we already said, we're going to have two cofs. If we're going to have two arguments, right? So we've got the lower one, let's call it rep, which we've got as a cof. We have some kp in the spec. I'll write kp just as an abbreviation for case.cof, blah, blah, blah. And then in this position here, we've got something that we know contains at least noun and adjective. And then here, so this is the tree we've already seen. We've got KP and POS. So we've got these two relational categories. So, and then in a little bit higher up, we've got these quantifiers like ULIF, okay, which means all. And then what I'm going to suggest, so it's ULIF phrase. Something like that. And then what I'm going to suggest is higher up is D. So the analysis essentially will go that for a norm, and we've seen this already, for a normal noun phrase where we say the big picture of Mary at John, we move this into this higher D position, like that, and we get picture big all of Mary at John. Okay? That's what we've seen already. So what about the case where, okay, so I have a few things I want to say about this. First of all, I'm going to make this more explicit. So what's going to be inside here is we're going to have the root, this picture, it's going to be an N, and there'll be various other bits of structure like adjectives. And then what we also, I think, have in here are numerals. And then the last thing we have in here is a category I'm going to call def. And what def is it's what marks the thing as definite or not, effectively. It's the locus of definiteness. And then it's this thing here that moves into this higher spec D. Now, so far I haven't told you very much about the pronunciation of these things, right? But do you remember what I said about this KP? I said that K, when it's valued by cof pos, okay, has the pronunciation ek or at. Whereas K, when it's valued by cof rep, has the pronunciation jet, which is off. Right? So notice what I've said there. I've said that the case head gets its pronunciation by being in a relationship with the higher D, higher functional category. That's exactly what's going to happen here. So def will get a value here of D, okay? And that is the pronunciation of the article. I think universally that's what happens. So universally this def category, right, is effectively the thing that gets valued by D and is pronounced as either a definite or an indefinite article. Okay. All right, so that means that if we don't put this in D, we're not going to get any pronunciation of def, right? So if it's valued by something else, like whatever, cof or whatever, then it's not going to get a pronunciation. This gets a pronunciation as an article when it's def in D. All right, so that's one proposal, and then the second proposal I'm going to make. So this is the way that the system is going to work for spell out in general. The second proposal I'm going to make is that K when it's valued by D, that is genitive. Right? So that K valued by Kof gives you a preposition. K valued by this Kof gives you a preposition. K valued by D gives you a genitive. Def valued by D gives you an article. Okay? And you can imagine K valued by T gives you nominative. K valued by little v, or O, or whatever it is, gives you an accusative. So basically the morphological for, and this is completely traditional, right? It's a very traditional idea, just implemented here like this. The value of the highest element here, the value of the case element here, is given by the functional category it relates to. So you could even take this into Korean or Japanese, and you could say K valued by top gives you wa, or whatever it is, right? K valued by T gives you ga. K value, is there any focused one? No. K valued by applicative gives you ni, or whatever, right? K valued by D gives you no. So that's Japanese, which I know about, in Korean. But anyway, you see the idea, right? The idea then is that generally these little particles are like prepositions, right? But they're not. We're really saying that these prepositions are like case particles, in a sense, right? So that the preposition-case relationship turns out to be one which is very, very, very close, at least for the simplex prepositions. For more complex prepositions like the locatives that you were talking about the other day, I think that actually we've got a locational structure in there, right? Much richer structure. There's still a K in there. So that's actually why often you see these locational prepositions are complex, with an axial part and number or whatever. Okay.
I have a question. So in Japanese nominal, every PP can be marked with genitive. I don't know.
With no.
Yeah. So does this mean every KP moved to?
No. So I mean, this is the answer. This is related to a question someone at the back asked yesterday about syncretism, right? So in many languages, a lot of these spellouts are syncretic. So you might find that all of the kofs and the D in Japanese are all no.
Oh, but
or maybe
also the postposition appear.
Oh, that's right. You get no and then
So
postposition.
From no or no.
But those are the more complex ones again, right? In general, those are locative or goal or something more complex. Is
But
that
I
not true?
think every postposition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's possible in
Okay.
Korean.
Basically, yes. Every.
So I don't know what the answer is to that. No. So maybe no is not genitive. I feel it is. I feel it is. So we couldn't analyze. So in Gaelic, for example, there are a number of prepositions which look as follows. Where you have, for example, above, right, is oscium azursh. So this is above the table. This is genitive, right? Oops. This is genitive. So why is that? Well, I think that this is the K, actually. This is a KP, right? So, we've got K genitive. So it's in the specifier of, it must be in the specifier of D somewhere. I think that what's going on here is that this is really a noun of some sort. It's not a noun in normal Gaelic. There's no noun in Kyun. I think it used to be a noun meaning head a long time ago. In fact, there is the modern word is kyan, but it doesn't have this form. So something's going on inside here making this much more complex. It's not just a normal preposition plus a complement. It's a preposition plus complement with some nominal thing inside it. Right? So I think that really what's going on in this is that this is some kind of complex DP. That is in the spec of that D. Right? And then we build up this larger structure. So maybe those Maybe that's what's going on with the not in Japanese. It's just that this is not, and it's backwards. Right?
In fact, I think in Korean we have that kind of stuff. It's not really post position, it's a noun plus some marker.
Yeah.
Above, in front of.
So I mean, there's a lot. I mean, you know, the system says, you know, well, that a lot of it. I mean, so a lot of these little particles that are involved in nominal case licensing, whatever they are, should be spelled out with K in some relationship with some higher functional head. That's what it says. So, you know, I mean, at first glance, maybe those Japanese no plus postposition look weird. The only possible analysis would be something like this, right? And then we'd have to look and see if there's evidence for that. Okay, so, yeah, of course.
So in your system, those small things, right, like functional categories, def, K, are not hits, right?
Yeah.
Then how can you capture their relative orders in terms of their the other substantial stuff, right? In English and other languages, they precede, I mean,
yeah.
And in Korean and Japanese,
they
follow, right?
Yeah. So this is what we talked about the other day. So remember, I've got three aspects to linearization that follow from my system. One is just basically specs before the complement within a head domain, right? Then another one was the linearization, the pronunciation of roots. So we have roots, and we have various functional categories. And I said that that was essentially pronounced as a single unit, so it's vocabulary insertion, at one of these, whatever it is, right? So the way that that works is that, this is following Brody, is that this is pronounced effectively like this. We'll do 1, 2, 3. F1, F2, F3. Well, actually, the morphology, I'll call them N. Morphology of 1, morphology of 2, morphology of 3. But of course, because it's a single unit, sometimes this gets mushed into a single thing. So this is like kick, id, ba, eat. Right? So this is like fusion. Right? Then there's the final bit that I talked about is this, where this is the insertion point for the vocabulary item, right? So here's where we put, imagine this is cat, right? And then here is a fragment of this projection line, which is what we're talking about right now, okay? So this would be something like D. So this would be something like, or this would be def in D, right? So this would be something like this. Now, here's the issue. I haven't said anything yet about the linear relationships between these two units, right? And I suggested a couple of days ago that this is a purely phonological relation, right? I suggested. I mean, another way to do it would be to say that that actually it's always head before complement. I mean, it's always, you know, head, I mean, so when I say head, I mean functional category. Category here takes this as complement, right? So we can say this fragment must precede this fragment. And that's the same as this. So what we said is spec for complement in a head domain, but maybe we wouldn't just be completely Keynesian and say spec for head for complement. And this is really the phonology of the spec for the phonology of the head, for the phonology of the complement, right? So then we'd say the phonology of F3 precedes the phonology of its complement, this one here, right? So in a sense, these particles that are fragments of lines, okay, will be in the reverse of affixes. So what we should get is particle, root, affix in the general case. So that's one way of doing it, right? Another way of doing it is saying this is a purely phonological relationship, and I quite like that, right? That depends then upon the properties of this. right? So if this is sort of proclitic, it will precede this. If it's enclitic, then these will reorder. But I don't have, I mean, that's what I would like to eventually get to say, because otherwise we don't really have a story for how clitics work, right? In general. So that's where I'd like to go at the end. So in terms of English pre-nominal particles versus Korean final things, I would say that the Korean ones look like this. That is, they're suffixes added to the root in an agglutinative fashion. So they're linearized following the Brody system. Whereas the English ones, or the Gallic ones, look like this. So, does that answer the question? Well, it does answer the question. I mean, is that satisfactory answer to the question? I don't know. So, because I haven't really developed a theory of what's going on here. Yeah. But there is a theory for this and a theory for this. So actually, you know, theoretically, Korean and Japanese is fine, looks like that. And I don't quite have a theory for English yet, right? Because there's an issue about how fragments correlate with this. Where I want to go is that this is a phonological relation. But I don't know if that's right, because there's a generalization in English, which is that all of these little things precede this. If each one could change phonologically, you'd expect to find English having a few, you know, post-nominal determiners here and there. It doesn't. So, yeah.
I'm wondering how your system accounts for the difference between the can of Coke and a can of Coke.
Oh, the can of Coke?
Coke and a can of Coke.
And a can of Coke.
Yeah. So, in the case of a can of Coke, it also have...
Oh, you just wonder about indefinites in general?
Yeah, not indefinite. So it's a kind of counting noun. A can of Coke, 2 cans of Coke, something like that. But we
it's not in English, right?
That's not English.
I mean, a can of Coke is just an indefinite of the definite, the can of Coke, right?
A bottle of Coke, a bottle of wine. But
like these ones, like this is a good...
Say,
I see, when you say this is a good bottle of wine, what you're meaning is that it's a good bottle of wine, rather than a good bottle of wine, right? So so the pseudopartitives versus true partitives. I'm just do exactly what the standard view does here, right? So in the bottle of wine case, I generate a smaller system here, smaller structure here, and then create the indefinite, right, by putting in a quantifier here and raising it to d, right? In fact, I don't even need to do that. I could just generate, just not generate depth.
So, but according to your theory, PP choose noun instead of and choose the argument, right? So of core.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is the same PP though, but the function is different than in that case.
Yeah.
Can get.
So I mean, you're right. Pseudopartitives, though. I mean, I have to say something different from pseudopartitives than I do for these, because pseudopartitives we know have a different structure, right?
Right.
So the issue is, what does my system do for pseudopartitives? I haven't come up with an analysis of that, but I mean, off the top of my head, I would do this. I would say that there's a kind of Kof, maybe it's much lower than the other ones, right? Which means not just part, but it means sort of unit, or something like that, right? And then what that Kof does is lower than the other ones, right? What it has here is still a K, right? That gives us of, as we expect. But what's in this bit here is lower, smaller than the other stuff, right? So that actually what we project up here is the F that puts the adjective in, right? So we get bottle, and then here we get, I'm making this up, right, because I haven't thought it through. We get bottle N, and maybe classifier, I'm not sure. That's about as far as it goes in this case, right? And then the adjectives just continue as though we were in this remainder, just so the rest of the extended projection just works as normal. So we have F, and then maybe quantifiers or numbers, and D, and so on. So this would give us a good bottle of wine, right? Where a good modifies bottle of wine, right? So it includes this. So this is a good thing, which is a unit, and the unit is a bottle of wine, as opposed to the real part is, right, which would have a structure that would look more like this one. I think that's what I would do. But I am making that up, right off the top of my head. But I think, like, so that would mean that the universal extended projection of the noun, right, will go n, and then very low down, we'll have cof unit. And then, and maybe that's the same as classifier, in fact. Maybe. And then later on, we have the rest of the cofs, like parts, and rep, and pos. So it would just be a much lower one of these elements that actually takes in a spec a lower thing. I would imagine that then that needs to have semantic difference from these ones. So the selection, so the things that are being modified here, right, this is a modification relationship, these have to be of the right type to modify. So they would be not an individual, but rather a portion, or something like that. Yeah, something like that. Okay, but I made that up right now, so I'm being videoed, which worries me. So I just want to say for the record, this is made up right now, right? This might not be the right analysis. You know, if I ever work in these pseudoparticles, I may do something else. Yeah.
Also, I have another question that yesterday you told us that locative is not relational.
It's much higher, yeah.
Much higher, but some kind of locative preposition under, above, it also tells us some relation between space, right?
Sure.
That's special.
No, I think that's right, but I think that those
so
are...
why do you include that kind of relationship?
Yeah, no, those are just much higher up. But you can even do it with a cof lock, right? They're just much higher up. And actually, I think that there's also something which is like a relative, you know, it's like cof rel. I mean, I use cof here because, you know, I've developed a system for these low PPs. But really, all they are their ways of instantiating semantic relationships in this sort of flipped structure, where the semantic relationship is realized by a predicate on the right, effectively. So, I mean, that's kind of what, it's not predicate, but yeah, that's kind of what these cofs are doing. They're allowing you to create modificational relationships, but actually they're modificational relationships that are ordered by the functional sequence, okay? And they have the same structure all the way up, except some are relational, right? And some are not relational, so like the thing is not relational. So, and I think that locatives are exactly like this, but they're way outside this structure, much higher up. Yeah. And I think they're actually pretty close to where demonstratives are. So I think demonstratives and locatives are in the kind of space area of the noun phrase extended projection. Unlike these things, which are in the kind of relation area of noun phrase extended projections. Right. Okay. I was in the middle of saying something which I thought, oh yeah. So these various things are spelled out. So the idea is that, you know, that these little fragments of functional structure can be spelled out by functional morphemes, effectively, right? So that's how we do these heads. Okay, so so the basic idea then. Oh, and I should give credit where credit's due. So the notion that the definite article is a sort of spell out of some syntactically complex relationship is actually Giuliano Giusti's from way back in the 90s. She had this idea about Romanian definite articles and Italian definite articles. So this is sort of her idea that I've just kind of turned into something a bit more modern. All right, so now with this idea, we now more or less have this the p-gen alternation. It follows more or less straightforwardly. How does it follow straightforwardly? Well, let's keep this structure we have. Say I take this possessor here, and I don't give it cove as its value. And what instead I do is I move it to D. Okay? That's it. That's basically the proposal. Notice that what that does for us. The first thing it does for us is that it says that the possessor here will end up getting possessive semantics appropriately, right down here, and it will have genitive, what's the word I'm looking for? Pronunciation. Okay. Notice also that we can move this and put it up here instead, right? That is, we can take one of these lower coves and do that, and it'll be exactly the same. It won't be pronounced as a preposition then, it'll be pronounced as a genitive. So that immediately captures the fact that the genitive is the semantic superset of all the possible semantic relationships that can be built up with coves. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if we move this up to there, we value it as D, obviously we can't move this into there. Right? We can't move picture into D, because this is in D. But if this definite is only pronounced as an article, it's in D, then we don't get the definite article co-occurring with the genitive. Okay? So that's the second, there's an order issue, but I'll come back to that in a second. So that's the second point. So remember that definite articles were in complementary distribution with genitives, even though they weren't in the same place in Gallic, right? Well, that will follow because D is filled by the possessor and not by this, right? There's a further thing we have to say about Gallic, which is that this needs to move, right? So I'll propose, and we'll see that this is a point of parametric variation, right? So in some languages it doesn't need to move. In Gallic it needs to move. So I'll propose it moves into the spec of K, top K of the whole thing. So that will move up to there. So what we'll get is picture big James, right, genitive, of Mary. Right? Now, so we've captured the fact that it's picture big, and not the picture big, James. We've captured the fact that James can be the possessor, or James can be any of the other things. Right? We've captured the fact that I haven't told you about, that actually, well, we've captured the fact that the genitive obligatorily precedes all of the other PPs. Okay? It follows the adjective. I haven't told you about the fact that actually it also follows the quantifier all. It's also in complementary distribution with the demonstrative. I haven't shown you that in the analysis, that's basically because the demonstrative moves to that position. Right? Demonstrative moves to that position, and then this raises into the K position. Okay. So actually we capture almost every single aspect, in fact, not almost, we capture all the relevant aspects of this P-gen alternation just through this through the mechanism of spell out of functional categories, which I have to say something about anyway, and this claim that that we don't have to assign case here, right? We can effectively assign case here. Now, the one thing I haven't really captured is the fact that this has to move in Gallic to the highest position. Okay, and that's just something that has to be stipulated in this analysis, right? But I think it's the right thing to be stipulated because if we, I'll tell you in a sec, I'll come back to this in a sec, because if you look at other languages such as Hawaiian, which we'll come to later on, in Hawaiian what we get is this stays in situ. So what we get is a high genitive, and then no definite article with the noun, and then lower prepositions. Or we don't get the genitive, we get a prepositional possessor, and then this raises up to here and we get a definite article. Right? So that looks like Hawaiian does one thing, Gallic does another thing, and the thing it's doing is just basically, does this have to move or not? In Gallic it has to move. Right? Now I don't know exactly how I want to capture that in Gallic it has to move. Right? But something has to be said in order to simply capture the distinction between Gallic and Hawaiian. Right? I'll come to the Hawaiian cases later on. So it's a stipulation, but it's exactly where you want a stipulation to be. right? It's a stipulation about move or not to capture parametric difference. Okay. All right. So I'm going to briefly tell you the thing that when I was working through this analysis. The basic proposal is what you see in 50, just so you can sort of see it. When I was working through this analysis, I realized that it made a prediction which I had expected. And that prediction is, okay, so if we really just say that the only way to get genitive is to hack on something is basically to be, part of the extended projection of that k valued by d, right? So we're essentially saying if we've got the word for wife is ben in Gaelic. I chose this because it's got a great genitive. So, and that's a noun. So the pronunciation of this unit, right, in Gaelic is n-nali. Isn't that cool? Oh, that's how you spell it, sorry. Namlai. Ben becomes namlai, the wives. The wife, sorry, genitive. So, what I'm saying is that the way to get the spell out of this whole thing, right, is that you better be in the right extended projection with this K and D. That's the proposal, right? So there's this very weird thing about Gaelic genitives, which I've never understood, but which turns out to follow from this analysis, which was unexpected for me. So the weird thing is this. In Gaelic, if you have a string of possessors, and you want them all to be genitive possessors, you can only put genitive on the last one. Some weird rule, right? You're thinking like, what a weird rule this is. Why would you do that, right? So if you look at 51, pseudotargeted, I should remove. If you look at 51, 51 is the hair of the wife of the minister. Okay? So if you said the hair of the wife, right? Full stop. You'd expect fault. Hair, and then this is genitive, the wife. But if you say it's the wife of someone else, and you put that in the genitive, right? Then this is fault, and then we've got wife, I'll put this, which would be ben, and then evinishkir. Oh, genitive. So what happens is that, this is the last noun phrase, it gets genitive. Now this is the last noun phrase, so this no longer gets genitive, even though it's the hair of the wife of the minister. So basically all of these nouns stay nominative, or whatever it is. They don't mark genitive, right? And that's just a weird glitch of grammar in Gaelic, and it's always stated in Gaelic grammars as, here's a weird glitch you have to learn, which is only put genitive in the last thing, okay? And it's true, I mean, you check it with native speakers, and they all do this, and it's kind of weird. But it's not actually weird. And it's not weird because, actually, if you run through the system, you try to generate Falt Ben Venus Kid, you get the tree in 52. Now, I'm sorry it's so small, it's even so small for me. But the crucial point there is that Ben, right, if you look at Ben, which is in the spec of that K, right, that Ben itself does not build up to a K that's in the spec of D, right? So that K, right, is in the extended projection of possessive, of the Kof. Its specifier is Ben. Right? But in order to get genitive, this specifier, this is to be Ben, the projection of Ben was to be the specifier of D. It would be a KP specifier of D, but it's not, right? It's a Ben's def P specifier of K. And the K belongs to the whole covariant projection, possessive projection. Right? So, and if you just continue, so if you continue like embedding, you know, if you said, I don't know, Puchten hackich falt. No, it doesn't make any sense. Puchten hackich ben Venuscher, the button of the jacket of the wife of the minister. They're all nominative, right? The da Puchten hackich ben Venuscher, color of the button of the jacket of the wife of the minister. Nominative, 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 genitive. Right? And if you build this up in the way that my system works, you'll never, ever, ever get any of those possessors, effectively, to appear in the right place to get genitive case. The only one that will ever appear in the right place to get genitive case is going to be the actual topmost possessor. Okay, I mean, it's not crucial you understand that, because it's just a weird little glitch of Gaelic grammar, but it's kind of neat that it follows from the system. A few other things just to finish this before we go and look at other languages. So if you might be wondering, and I think this is a number of questions that come up here, you might be wondering what happens with indefinites. Actually, I think I'll skip this because I think it'll be more interesting to move to the other cases. What time are we at? Oh my gosh. I didn't realize it was so late. Okay, I'm going to skip 3.4 and I'll have a real quick run through of Hawaiian and Semitic. Semitic, I don't really have a proper analysis for, just kind of gesture analysis, and then we'll stop, okay? And then we'll sum up. Alright, so Hawaiian I think is fantastic. Hawaiian is really cool. Because Hawaiian is, of course, massively, not particularly genetically related to Celtic. Right? There isn't any Polynesio-Celtic hypothesis. Although those Polynesians did get a lot of places, they didn't get out to the Western Isles of Scotland, I don't think. So Hawaiian, though, is very similar to Celtic in terms of its noun phrase structure. So have a look at 69. So we've seen this before. This is the picture big of the tree of David, meaning David's big picture of the tree. And you see we've got ke ki'i nui, the picture big, Oke kumula'au of the tree, o kawika of David. Right? Kawika is easily just got from David in Hawaiian because Hawaiian doesn't like dentals, and it makes all of its dentals into K's. Right? So David becomes kawika. Right? Isn't that cute? Okay, I thought it was cute. All right, so now Hawaiian has P-gen as well, right? So basically in Hawaiian, to say David's big picture of the tree, you can also say I kokawika ki'i no I oke kumala'au. That is the David's picture big of the tree. So we can give exactly the same analysis to this, which is what I give you in 71. And this is the point I made earlier on. So in Gaelic, the phrase containing big picture moves up and it becomes before the possessor. In Hawaiian, it just stays where it is. But crucially, you don't get pronunciation of the definite article. You don't get the K. Right? So you get 71, you get I, which is the case particle in the whole lot, it's accusative, right? And then kokawika, which is of David, or David's genitive. And then you get ki'i nui, so the def is not pronounced now because it's not moved to D. Right? And then oke kumala'au is the preposition. You can also show that the co-CP, that is the genitive CP, C commands the others by using binding effects. So I've given you that briefly, but you don't need to go through it. But the really cool thing is that when the def remains in C2, right? That is, well, I'll show you what happens. And then you get this weird thing happening. So have a look at 74. So 74 is the plural version, right, with the prepositional possessor. So maka'av, I like. Ina hale ho, the new houses. So hale means house, but na means the plural, right? Ho means new, and then okawika. So So makimaki au I nahali ho okawika. So I like David's new houses. Okay. But then what happens if you move the prepositional possessor into the genitive position? You get this really weird thing where you get a little extra plural appearing. Now, unfortunately, for some weird reason, my glossing's gone wrong there. So let me write this up. In fact, if we just finish with this, we don't even need to submit it, because this is so cool. So this is makimaki-a, like I, I ko kawika, accusative, and this is genitive, David, constituent, ki-i, which is missing in the gloss, right? Picture. No, that's what's happening. Ki shouldn't be there. Okay. That's right. So we should look at this. Mao, hale. Okay. Oh. Sorry. So the ki is just cut and paste error. Right? Ki means picture. Shouldn't be here. Okay. So this is plural, and then this is house, and this is me. Okay. So apologies for the glossing issue there. So example 75 should just be missing ki, right? And then what happens is this word mao appears when we take this kokawika and move it here. And that seems really strange, right? So this means I like David's new houses, and we get mao appearing, right? But we just saw beforehand, right? We have I like David's new houses with the prepositional possessor, then you get na. Na means the houses, right? So what's happened in this construction then? Why with the genitive do we get this mao thing appearing? Whereas with the prepositional thing, we got this the plural appearing. Right? Well, it follows really, really neatly from the analysis of PGen as simply moving either def to D or K to D. So have a look in 76. So 76 would be the analysis of I, na, haliho, o, kawika. Accusative, the plural, houses new of David. That's 76, right? And you can see what I've done is I've basically said that def with num underneath it, which is plural, is pronounced as na. Okay? So that's our system says you get to pronounce def when you're in the spec of D. And in this case, we've got num plural here, so we actually pronounce the whole span of it as na. However, of course, if we take the possessor PP, or KP really, and we put that in D, then this is going to end up not being D at all, right? It's going to end up being just where it started off, which is in spec of Koth. Right, so that's the tree you see in 77. So in this case, we've moved the possessor into D, so we get genitive, we get K appearing as genitive, so we get kokawika. But that means, much as in Gaelic, we've not moved def into D. But def in D is what is pronounced as the article. So we can't pronounce this, right? There's no pronunciation to this. So all we get left over to pronounce is this, right? Number plural, which is pronounced as man. Right? So that's why we get this weird plural appearing whenever we have, it seems a very strange thing, right? Mark plural independently when you genitivize a possessor. Otherwise, don't mark plural on the definite article, right? But it follows immediately from the system, actually. Very neatly from the system. Okay, I'll skip Semitic, because the analysis of Semitic is not that good. I mean, it's okay, but like Semitic construct states are a bit of a nightmare. And I'll just finish with English, right? So English actually just looks incredibly similar to all these other languages. What happens in English is what you see in the tree in 89. Okay? So we've got Anson's big statue of Lily. It's always good to finish with Anson and Lily, of course, right? So Anson's big statue of Lily, we could say the statue of Lily of Anson, but English doesn't allow us to assign case from possessive cof, right? So as I pointed out earlier on, unlike Romance syntacticians seem to think, in English you cannot have an of phrase with a possessive reading, right? They all mean something different. So if you have something like the Gospel of Luke, that's not really Luke's Gospel, that's the Luke characterized Gospel, right? I mean, that's like, it's not possessive, it's like the Gospel which is characterized by being the Gospel that Luke did, right? And so on. So we have a sort of characterizing meaning of, but we never had a normal possessive meaning of. Well, we can get that, but only with of apostrophe s. So, you know, the car, or a car of my mother's. Then you can get possessive. But with a simple noun phrase after of, you never get possessive in English. And in my story, that's because kof pos simply can't value k in English. Right? I mean, there's a number of ways of saying this. But you could say if you get that value, then it's bad. However you want to say that. Either, I mean, I don't want to say it's no spell out, but maybe it crashes that spell out. Right? It just gives you some bad result that spell out. So what you have to do in English is, with possessors, you need to raise to spec D. But then, of course, you can't have pronunciation of def. Right? So that means you get Anson's big statue of Lily and not Anson's the big statue of Lily. It means you can't have the big statue of Lily of Anson. Right? Which follows. It means you can say Lily's big statue, meaning the statue of Lily. Right? You can't say Lily's big statue of Anson, because of course, I mean, you can say that, but it means Lily is the possessor, Anson is the theme. You can't have Lily's big statue of Anson, meaning Anson's big statue of Lily, because of Anson can't be assigned case by kof possessor. Okay? So actually we get a whole range of cute, weird little facts about English possession from this analysis as well, which I think is quite cool. Okay, so I guess finishing the possessives is maybe not the most exciting thing to finish on in terms of big theoretical stuff. But I think what it's allowed me to do is to show how actually the general system I set out at the start works. Because the general system has a number of problems, in a sense, from a traditional perspective. One of the big problems it has is, well, if there are no functional heads, what are functional morphemes? Okay? And the analysis I propose for functional morphemes is or at least some of them, are spell-outs of fragments of the function of the extended projection, right? And I've begun to develop a theory about what those spell-out fragments are, right? So for case, for example, I've suggested that case elements, some prepositions, and when I say case elements, I mean the whole phenomenon of morphological case, right? All of those are related to a K category getting a value from D. So that's meant to be a general universal, right? About the relationship between the category K and its spell out. Right? Ditto, so that gives us some insight into what case is actually, right? Ditto, the notion of articles, definiteness markers, those are all going to be the spell out def, right? When valued by D. Now, in my system, it turns out that D always ends up having a spec. So there, D, now here's where I kind of come back to where I started off at the very start. Because I started off at the very start saying, oh look, people have always assumed a parallelism, right, between the noun phrase and the sentence. And I kind of poo-pooed that parallelism and said, no, it's not really right. But actually, maybe we're coming back to something more like that parallelism. Because if I say D universally always needs to have a specifier of some sort, that sounds very familiar, right? That sounds like the EPP. And that sounds like the EPP inside DP, right? Which people have said doesn't happen. Right? In fact, in my book, in my 2003 book, I suggested that there were no EPP features on D even in English, right? Because of the absence of expletive constructions in DPs, right? But actually, I got that wrong. Yeah. There is an EPP in English. It's because def in English always raises to D that there are no expletive constructions in DPs in English, right? So the spec of D is actually always filled, maybe like the spec of T is always filled. So we come back to sort of saying that, you know, when I said, oh, Chomsky's wrong, there isn't really a parallelism between between DP and CP. Actually, you know, it begins to look like, once again, there is, right? At least in certain kinds of areas. At least high up in the structure, if not low down in the structure. So, that's me finished. And before I finish, though, I want to everyone to give a huge round of applause to the organizers of this conference, which, from my perspective, has been an absolute delight. It's been a great conference, fantastically interesting talks, really lovely people, incredible hospitality. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for the energetic lecture, and it must be pretty good because no one left.
No one left, yeah.
But if you don't mind, come down and ask afterwards for any questions.
Sure,
Is
yeah,
this
yeah.
the only chance? Okay.
Yeah, so there, and... Do you want a
Microphone, please.
It seems that your theory of NP can account for the fact that article and noun can be replaced by a noun like that. As in such an example, like the climate of Korea is similar to that of Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whereas the standard theory of NP is trying to resist the problem in dealing with that.
Yeah, that's true. So there's a footnote somewhere to chapter 6, chapter 5 of the book where I go through a number of cases exactly like that. Yeah.
Right. Then I have a question about your theory. Well, I wonder how you can account for the fact that noun had, and if the PP complement can form a constituent. For example,
To the exclusion of
yeah, in the case of example 89 on page 15. Well, I think it's hard to say. You like the big statue of Lily. Yeah, you like the big statue of Lily, but I like the small one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In that case, the N and the big complement can form a constituent.
Yeah.
And it can be replaced by pronoun one. But in your system, well, I don't know how you can explain that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's that footnote I referred to, which I'll now explain to you. So actually, it turns out that one replacement as a constituency diagnostic is terrible. It's a very bad constituency diagnostic because actually you're really relying on your semantic intuition about the fact about the context, what the context means when you say you like the big statue of Lily, but I like the small one, right? Now, is one replacing statue of Lily, or is one replacing statue, but you know that it's of Lily because you've already set up the context, right? So that's another potential analysis of one, that it only replaces the N, right? But you elide the PP and recover it from context. Now, there's an example that's due to Ross, which I can't get from the top of my mind, it's in here, way back, which made me convinced that that's probably what I just suggested is probably going on. So, if you put the adjectives in a focal order, then you get unambiguous interpretation. So have a look at. So the example you gave, I think, is not. You know, it's potentially. It's easy to analyze that by saying that you just elided independently the PP and are picking up from context. A sharper kind of example might be something like what's on page 175 of my book in note 8, sub-example 1, where it's the small picture of the cat is much better than the one of the dog. Okay? So, does one there mean the small picture of the dog or just the picture of the dog? Right? Hard to tell. However, if you get two adjectives and you put them the other way around, then it turns out you get quite a strong intuition that the one replaces the non-focalized adjective and the noun. So that's like the iron small statue of the horse is cheaper than the gold one of the elephant. Where one there does seem to pick up small statue to the exclusion of elephant. Right? So what that suggests is that one is really picking up. So if we've got, n, some adjective, and then pp. What that suggests is that one can pick up this, right? If we control for various kinds of focal effects. Right? So it seems to me that the analysis of one as an n bar, where we have adjectives and pp's inside this, is not going to run, because otherwise you have no explanation of why, when we focalize the adjective, we get a very strong interpretation of this to the exclusion of that. And then there's another example I've given you from Jackendorf, which suggests again that with ellipsis, it looks like you want to say that the adjective and the noun are a constituent to the exclusion of the pp. So that's as follows. Bill's funny story about Sue and Max's about Kathy both amaze me. Right? So, funny story. But what about Bill's funny story about Sue and Max's boring? Both amaze me. Or Max's boring about Kathy both amaze me. That's impossible. Right? So, what that again suggests is that requires ellipsis of an an constituent to the exclusion of the p. Right? I mean, but these are, I think, these, I didn't put these in the main chapter, and I didn't really discuss them in any great depth, because I think that it's all a bit subtle, right? I mean, it's hard. I think one is not a good diagnostic, because you need to understand the semantics of it too much, and then, so if you begin to control for the discourse effects, I think actually you end up thinking that this is the constituent, rather than this being the constituent. So, I said we start off with like, oh, this is what we teach our students in Linguistics 101, right? We use one anaphora, we have Radford, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I think it's not such a great diagnostic, right? So there's a diagnostic for hierarchy, right? So I think you can use one to sort of have a diagnostic for hierarchy. You can leave behind one pp, right? And then just as we saw there, have an adjective in the n. I think that tells you the adjective and the n are constituents to the exclusion of the pp. And you can remove one pp and leave behind another pp. But that doesn't really tell us very much more than the pp's are hierarchically ordered, and that's what everyone thinks, right? Right. So the complement pp is lower down than the possessive pp or the by phrase, but that's exactly what you could say that one could just replace this chunk. Right?
Then how can you distinguish between a complement pp and an adjunct pp?
Well, my system doesn't really do that, right? I mean, they're all modifiers in my system. They're all modifiers, but they're modifiers that are organized along the lines of the universal extended projection of the nominal, right? So it's Cinquean, this system, in a sense. In the same way that Cinque says that, in the same way that Cinque says, that there's adjectives that are ordered by the universal functional sequence of adjectives, and they come in strict order. I would say that these pp's also come, and actually Cinque says the same, these pp's also come in strict order given by the extended projection, right? So, I'm certainly not saying that there's no hierarchy. There's a lot of hierarchy, right? I'm just saying the hierarchy is slightly different from what people have otherwise said.
So I think that you know that complement pp's behave differently from adjunct pp's.
Right, so here's a very interesting question, yeah. So, with extraction, for example. So, there is a very interesting question as to why certain things are extractable from and other things are not, right? So why this is even bigger, broader question than just pp's. So in my system, remember, basically, you've got, just even the general system, right? There's the root of the verb. And we've got the arguments are like the object is specifier O, and the subject is specifier V star. Standard view, head, complement, specifier, and then some weird stipulation somehow miraculously makes this extractable from and that not extractable from. We say complements are extractable from, specifiers not, but I've got specifiers here for both of these things. So we need another story for why the object is extractable from and the subject's not. The classical view actually is it's already unstateable in our system, right? I mean, even if we adopt this, minimalism, we still don't really have a view as to why complements are extractable from and subjects are not. I mean, we don't have a story for that, actually. We used to government. Government was like, look, this governs this, and therefore this is properly governed. This isn't properly governed unless we do something funky, like move that to there, and we govern it under a head extension or something. We used to have a story for this. We don't have a story now. I don't have a story either. That's okay. None of us have a story. I mean, I have some ideas about this, which would extend to why complement PPs behave differently from adjunct PPs with respect to extraction. But they're to do with the theory of extraction in general, rather than the theory of complement PPs. And they're not very well developed. So the basic idea will be that it's got to do with effectively intervention type effects and what happens when you get things out of the way for intervention. So you move the subject into subject position. That no longer counts as an intervener for the thing that's moved here, okay? Which allows you to move the object out some higher point. This is no longer going to count. It's going to be interpreted down here, which allows us to move the object out. But with the subject movement, right? Subject movement from here is always fine. Subject movement with respect to TP is not fine. Then I would adopt Roots's subject criteria and say there's a freezing effect in subjects. So yes, I have other views about what's going on with extraction, but I can't appeal to complement versus specifier because they're all specifiers. Ditto here, they're all specifiers. So strong island effects or extraction effects in general are going to have to reduce to relativized minimality effects in my system. I don't really have anywhere else to put them at the moment. Yeah, there. And then. Well, I saw this hand first.
This is maybe not an academic question. Okay, what do you think about the notion of scrambling or scrambling language?
That's a general question. I mean, I don't have anything to say from the perspective of this theory. What I think in general, I think I'm too ignorant to offer a reasonable solution to that. I mean, I worked on scrambling of the German, Dutch, kind of sort of a long, long time ago in my thesis. And at that point, I treated scrambling as movement to spec Adger P. Do you remember we had Adger P all those years ago? The younger people won't remember that. We had Adger P, right? And I said that what happens in those cases is that what Adger does is it imposes a pragmatic constraint on the thing on its specifier. So I use Hein's familiarity condition, and I said that Adger has essentially pronominal features in it. Pronouns are required to be handled by the discourse in a certain kind of way. Things in the spec of an Adger, therefore, inherit that, right? And therefore, when you scramble to the spec of Adger, you get, this is like Mahajan as well, you get this kind of like discourse effect. And then I said obligatory scrambling, right? So obligatory movement to Adger P. So this is a little bit like what you were saying in your paper. Obligatory movement to Adger P actually gives you two chain positions, a higher one and a lower one, right? You can interpret either of those, which means there's no interpretational effect. Optional movement to spec Adger P. Well, if you didn't take the option, right, you could have got the interpretation you wanted downstairs anyway. You did take the option, so that's like you move to have an effect on outcome in Chomsky's system, right? So that's that kind of what Chomsky calls the Reinhardt-Fox idea, but to be honest, it's in my thesis earlier. So that's what I did. That's the way I thought about scrambling of the Dutch-German sort way back when.
So no scrambling language.
Well, I don't know what that means, scrambling language. I mean, Yeah, I mean, I don't really know enough about scrambling in Japanese and Korean to understand what the conditions are in that. So yeah, I just am too ignorant to know what to say about that, I'm afraid. There was a question there.
I'm wondering if there is any quote that has no dependence. So quote stand or not, can stand or not.
Well, no. I mean, you mean like, so I said there's a transitive cof, which is these ones, an intransitive cof, which is a thing, and you're wondering if there's a weather cof, right? A cof for like, for which has nothing. I don't know, but I can't see what that would do. I mean, so it'd be a cof with no specifier. No, it can't happen.
Why modify is required?
It can't happen because I'm assuming that D always needs to have a spec filled, right? That D can only have a spec. D can't have a spec filled if there's nothing to fill the spec. The only thing we could fill the spec with, if we had a cof, so it would go like this. I realize I have an answer. So the hypothesis would be that we have some weird thing, which is a cof, and then we just go to D, right? Because that's the UEQ. But D needs to have a spec filled, right? But we can't take this and move it to here, because that would violate the condition against roll-up. So actually, we rule out in general cof with no argument, which I hadn't realized until you asked me that question. So thank you. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I have a question about your last point of non-existent of case licensing cof path. How do you drive an English example like this picture of mine?
Yeah, those are very good. That's a very good question. I don't have an analysis for those. So these are the examples like where you have a picture of John's or this friend of Sue's, those kind of cases, or mine, yours, etc. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I've been thinking about this and I haven't come up with a good answer. So these have a lot of. Part of the reason I've not come up with a good answer is because I don't quite understand what all of the conditions of these are. These are weird. So, for example, you put the in. That's bad. The friend of Sue's came yesterday. But a friend of Sue's came yesterday is fine. So there's some kind of condition, and this friend of Sue's turned up late. It's also okay. Right? So there's something very weird going on why you can't have the pronunciation of death in D here. Which suggests that this is somehow D. Right? And that Sue is in the spec of D here. But then I'm not quite sure what's going on with the remainder of this, which has to be smaller than death, or this has to be certainly not in spec D. So maybe that's some kind of so maybe that's something like a friend of Sue's friends. Okay? So if we take there to be an ellipsis here, okay, then Sue's would look just like a normal possessive. This would be a KP. It would be in the spec of the normal cof that you have for that. Right? So that would be pronounced as all. So of Sue's so far is looking fine. This would be the N in the spec of that cof. But what I still don't have an answer to, which is why I haven't analyze this, is why this is bad here, but this and that are okay. I mean, one answer, but I can't give it, would be to say that friend of moves from this lower position to some higher position here. I think Keynes' analysis is a little bit like that. And because that D is there, I can't pronounce a D here. But of course, I'm not allowed by my system to have that move to this position here. Oh, actually, maybe I am. Maybe I am. So, if we had, so there's Sue, there's a K, there's friend, there's deaf, friend. Those are various coves. And then D here, Sue moves to there. Yeah, this will be easy. Okay, wow, that's cool. Alright, so it follows very naturally from my system. Right? Because, so if Sue moves up to D, gets genitive, so it's Sue's. What doesn't follow is where the of comes from. Yeah, so that's the problem. Of, I don't have a story for. The reason, so putting aside of, which is a bit annoying, we would predict that we couldn't have the there because it would be not in spec D. So it could be a. I don't know what's going on with this friend of Sue's. This friend of Sue's is weirdly not normal definite, right?
Can't you have one more D above D?
Sorry? Couldn't I have one more?
D.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to have one more D because if I had one more D, I wouldn't have an explanation of why that can't be the. I mean, you can have what you can put a the in here, but only if you say the friend of Sue's that I met. But then that presumably is a structure where it's like this, right? So you've got, so this is like D, def, right? This is moved up from here. We get friend of Sue's that I met. Right, so that would be like the Canadian analysis of those. This one looks very neat up to the point that I don't have an explanation for that of. A picture of John. Yeah, okay. So I can give you 3/4 of the story, but I don't know what the of is doing there. Yeah. But I can give you an explanation of why indefinites are okay. This feels to me like an indefinite this, right? This friend of Sue's turned up at the party. I mean, it means one of Sue's friends, right? This friend of Sue's is nicer than that friend of Sue's. That's also okay. The friend of Sue's is not. That's really bad. I don't know how to deal with the complexities of this, but I think the analysis would have to look something like this, but I don't know what to do about that. But yeah, they've been on my mind, but I haven't finished analysing them.
Kawika is so possessed.
Sorry?
Kawika is so possessed.
Kawika is possessed with possession. Yes, exactly. Any other final questions?
Yes. Where should we end?
Okay, let's end.
That's end.
Okay, well, that's the end of the SECA 15. Thank you. And then we'll have a photo session game today. So come to the front to take a picture.
Oh, we're doing photos, guys.
Yes.
We did that yesterday.
Yes.
And then I want to make an announcement about the next year's SECA 16, which it is not scheduled, planning to be held in Jeju Island.
Oh!
The names of live speakers have been mentioned, but we have not made any decisions about that. That's it.